Now, Aquinas thinks this is the clearest argument. I think when you couple it with the second way, it's actually even clearer. But basically the same argument, but line of dominoes again. The third one's going to be very similar, but the third one's very different. It's not linear like dominoes. But this one's very similar. Second way. Let's go to the second way. Argument from efficient causes, or in other words, argument from cause and effect. That's what efficient causation means. It starts off the very same way, right? So we perceive a series of efficient causes of things in the world. In other words, I look out into the world, I see that things cause other things. That's all this is claiming. So again, if I'm looking for a premise to object to, this is not it. This is pretty unobjectionable. Down here, we can go ahead and peek ahead to see what he's going to conclude to, just because it's nice to know what he's going to land upon. And again, it's something like first efficient cause, right? So first, sometimes this goes in the literature as first cause or uncaused cause. So I'll put both in there, first cause or uncaused cause, either way. But the idea is the same. It's going to be a first cause and it's going to be not anything causing it. So the idea is the same, right? So I'd start out looking out in the world, things cause other things, unobjectionable. Premise 2, what about this one? Is this hard? And look, we're already reached our first conclusion here in premise 3. So if we object to this, then we got to find something up here to object to. So far, we don't have anything. But what about this one? Nothing exists prior to itself. This seems obvious. I don't exist prior to myself. But you might think, here's a way you could object to this. You might think, well, I mean, there's some religions that believe in reincarnation, right? So like before I was in this body, I existed prior in some prior mode or way. Maybe I was a fly in a prior life or something. Or even in some forms, Abrahamic faiths, they believe, like some forms of Christianity, they think that God creates the soul and then, it kind of puts it in the body, right? So maybe I exist prior to myself now. No. Let me explain. Let's just take the soul example, the creation of the soul, and God plops it into your body. Talk about whatever you want to talk about, but we're talking about you. Like if you're your body, most people don't think this, but imagine if you were your body did not exist before your body. Okay, you want to talk about your soul. Well, your soul did not exist before your soul. In order to exist before you exist, that's a contradiction, right? Because here's the threshold. Something begins to exist. It goes this way, let's say. So it goes this way on the timeline, right? And there's a prior time at which it exists. So I start my existence here, and then I begin to exist. I extend my timeline that way. Prior to my first existence, do I not exist? I don't exist because I start to exist here. But you're saying I exist prior to my existence as well. So over here, we're saying I both exist and don't exist. Sorry, buddy, that's a contradiction. So this is just incoherent to say that anything exists prior to itself existing, okay? So far, these two premises are just rock solid. There's no way of getting out of them. Therefore, nothing is the efficient cause of itself. And this one's pretty easy to accept as well. Obviously, accepted the premises before, but nothing causes itself to begin to exist. Sorry. So if you're thinking, by the way, if you're thinking of God as self-caused, that's actually incoherent. There's three possibilities when it comes to God's coming to be, or let's say, responsible for his existence. So we can think of God being, there's three options. Let me say, caused by another thing. 2, being self-caused, which we just ruled out. Or 3, being uncaused. And of course, if you're looking ahead and you're looking back to this first uncaused cause, there's going to be uncaused cause, but it just makes sense, right? So is God caused by another thing? No, because that would make him, reliant. And we'll see actually in this argument on why God can't be caused by another thing, because the first cause can't be caused by another thing. Self-causation, we just ruled out in this third premise. Nothing is the efficient cause of itself. Nothing can cause itself to begin to exist. It's just impossible, because in order to cause myself to begin to exist, I would have to exist before I exist, and that's a contradiction. Okay. So far, so good. We are through that. Now, number 4, and looking ahead, we have another therefore up here. So this I guess maybe is a critical premise. So if we don't toss it, we have to agree to this conclusion. But let's look at it. If a previous sufficient cause does not exist, neither does the thing that results. So in other words, there's going to be no effect if there's no cause. That's all that's saying. If there's no cause, then there's no effect. I mean, that's hard to object to, honestly. I mean, some people will here at this point, they'll say, well, what about quantum mechanics, quantum indeterminacy? Things can just pop into existence without having any cause whatsoever. No. I'm sorry to say, but I think when theoretical physicists talk like this, they're not very philosophically trained, because they're making philosophical claims, even though they're not philosophers. They're making philosophical claims and they're getting confused. What they're describing is that with quantum indeterminacy, I think they're making ontological or metaphysical claims about what exists and things not having causes, when they should be making epistemological claims, like we don't know what the cause was, or that the cause is indiscernible or something like that. But it's a quite different claim to say that some effect can happen not with a no discernible cause, that would be an epistemological claim, but an effect can happen with no cause whatsoever. That's an ontological claim. That's a major, major claim. And if that happens, as you'll see later in the slideshow, disastrous results come about. So basically, this more or less, even if you can flag this if you don't like it, and we'll come back to it. We can say more about it here in a minute, but we'll proceed. But basically, if you don't have a cause, then you don't have an effect. That's the way most cause and effect works. Most causation works. So it should be pretty unobjectionable, if not universally unobjectionable. So if we accept that, we get to the second conclusion, or premise 5. Therefore, if the first thing in a series does not exist, nothing in the series exists. Starting to sound a lot like that first way, right? If the first domino doesn't exist, then the last domino won't exist. And the series of efficient causes can't extend ad infinitum into the past, then there be no existing things now. Therefore, it's necessary to emit a first efficient cause. In other words, again, like we said, very similar to the first way with motion, except you might be like, well, why are these two arguments if they're basically the same thing? Well, because you can have causation without motion. We don't like to, well, it's not like we don't like to. We don't often think of these as separate, but they are distinct concepts, motion and causation. But you can have, like, they very often go together, right, in physical causation, right? Because anytime something has physical causation, then it's going to have motion as well, because it has movement within the physical world. But you can have, like I said, causation without motion. It's what's called simultaneous causation, right? So pick a time, any time slice of history, time t right now, for example. I'm sitting in this seat. No motion is happening with my rump, but my butt is currently depressing the chair, like performing the depression in the seat on the chair. That is a cause with an effect, but there's no movement happening. So what we have is simultaneous causation. So this is just one easy example, but very often they go together. You almost always have causation with motion, but they can come apart. And so it's important to have the concepts different as well. So that's why we have two arguments. So cause and effect, back to this, like I say, it's going to be very similar to the argument of motion. If you have a line of dominoes, I look out into the world, I see the dominoes are falling now on this side of things, they're happening. It's got to have started at some point, because if we say that it extends infinitely into the past, that means that there would be no beginning. That's what infinity means. Way back there was never a beginning. Well, if there's never a first domino to fall, then there wouldn't be dominoes falling now. That's just what logic demands. So there had to be at least one to start the whole thing off. There had to be the starting, let's say, the starting of the falling for it to be falling now. At some point, however far back, it started to fall. That's all this is saying, right? Because if it never started to fall, it wouldn't be falling now. That's all we're saying. And so at some point, however far back, however maybe not far back, we don't know, He's not making a commitment to anything about that. He's saying that at some point there was a first efficient cause.